Well, good morning, real estate fans, and welcome to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lima here with my cohort, Pete Bell Castro. We're both brokers at John L. Scott, Southern Oregon, and we have an absolutely fabulous show for you today. We're not only going to talk about what's going on locally with the real estate market and stats, but we also have as our special guest, we have Scott King from Merit Commercial going to discuss businesses, local commercial real estate and such. But before we get into that, Pete, how are things going in your world?
Well, think of what you just said about commercial real estate and why today's show is going to be so interesting. We finally got to look at April, the month of April, which was the first full month where we were under lockdown. Remember? It was April. And the stats show roughly real estate, Alice, in Jackson, Josephine County, down about 40 to 45%.
Wow, that's
in
huge.
activity. That's what it kind of ended up at in terms of new listings, solds, pending sales, about 40% less than it was a year ago. But okay, so we know that for residential real estate. So what is it for commercial real estate? What has happened in that particular area? And that's where Scott's going to help us kind of figure that out of the way. Because when you look at 40% drop, Alice, compare that to like the Jackson County Airport, 90% drop. Compare that to the hotel occupancy rate in Jackson County, which was about 25%. So real estate overall, at least in residential, weathered that storm probably the best maybe of most industries that we were around.
And commercial does have an interdependency with the residential market. They affect each other. They are affected by each other, but Scott's going to explain all that. And not to scare anybody, because the numbers coming out later, we predict are going to be better. But April was hard for sure.
I've just heard lots of stories, from building owners of commercial real estate to tenants, who lease, and what in the world's going to happen with certain industries and certain pockets, and what's going to happen to rents
and jobs.
We're going to hear it's going to be totally different. Yeah, I think that I think real estate, Alice, is going to be real estate in terms of commercial is going to be much more affected, it seems like, maybe than the residential part of this whole thing has been.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds, but we're so glad to have a few days under our belt of the stay-at-home order being lifted, phase 1 being enacted, and we'll be right back, so don't go away. We've got a great show for you today. Alice Lima, Pete Bell Castro, and Scott King discussing commercial real estate, jobs, and Southern Oregon real estate. Be right back. Well, welcome back to the radio show, the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lima with Pete Bell Castro. We're both brokers at John L. Scott, Southern Oregon, and we're here to talk to you today about Southern Oregon real estate, especially commercial real estate, and that has to do with jobs and businesses and what's happened with the pandemic. Today, we're so excited to welcome Scott King of Merit Commercial. Scott, tell us what's going on with you and your company during the pandemic.
Thanks for having me, guys. So when the lockdown first hit, things went quiet just very suddenly. Calls plummeted, inquiries plummeted. Everybody was kind of panicking, not understanding what all the repercussions were. And with any big government decision, like a government mandated shutdown, there's always unintended consequences. And so everybody is waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then people have started to calm down and come back into the market. 1031 buyers, of course, still have a deadline. It's been extended, but they still need to complete transactions for their tax.
Could you just briefly describe what a 1031 is for our listeners?
Sure. So a commercial property owner sells a building. They can do a tax-deferred exchange into a different property and avoid paying capital gains on that transaction.
So legal tax avoidance, folks.
So
legal.
That's what makes commercial real estate go around a lot of times. And there's some strict timing requirements on those transactions. So the feds announced an extension to July 15 for a lot of those deadlines, and that helped a lot. Made a big difference. So properties that are good targets for investors have remained at high interest levels since people have calmed down.
Okay, so, and you mentioned that there's a little bit more activity recently. What kind of buyers and sellers are you hearing from?
Well, not very many retail people, that's for sure. There's still a lot of big questions in that industry about what happens moving forward um, to brick and mortar retail, which was already happening. But, you know, with Amazon and Walmart now accounting for something like half of the retail purchases between the two of them online, something approaching that number, it's even more questions on brick and mortar retail. But businesses that stress pickup or delivery or takeout, they've been very busy and actually looking to expand operations, which is good.
Oh,
Again,
that's exciting.
pointing to a change in the way we could in the future use commercial real estate. So, you know, commercial real estate is under everything that you do as a consumer or a business person. If you go to the store to buy anything, you're in a commercial real estate piece. Go to the doctor, go to the dentist, go to the grocery store, go to your attorney's or CPA's office for taxes. Everywhere you go that isn't home is basically a piece of commercial real estate. So it's a huge piece of the economy and one that a lot of people just don't think about.
Well, it's just part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, it's a given for most people. Yeah.
Well, you know, Scott, they should think about that. And part of the problem seems to be is going forward with all the uncertainty, as you talked about the retail part of it. Boy, I don't know what's going to happen when you look at a place like Ashland and even Grants Pass, which is so reliant on tourism. Those places, it seems like, and the landlords, I suppose, that you deal with also, they've got to be, are they talking to each other, or are people able to pay, or what are you hearing out there? What are you seeing from the landlords that you deal with?
Yeah, so I help both landlords and tenants in this
Yeah.
situation, depending on, you know, the perspective is different from side to side, but I've advised a lot of landlords on how to negotiate with tenants to give them some relief, either temporary or actual forgiveness of some rents, and as time goes on. There's a combination of both. And everybody in either camp, tenant or landlord, needs to be having these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be surprised when a 90-day moratorium on eviction gets lifted, and then don't expect to not owe those 90 days of rent, because you will. Landlord still has to pay their mortgage. So everybody needs to be talking, whether from either perspective, landlord or tenant.
I heard a really good story where the landlord, was asking the agent, well, my tenant can't pay, or needs some help here. And basically the agent said, well, you better deal with them because there's nobody to take their place. In other words, if they go, what are you going to replace them with? So you better deal with the tenant, or you're not going to have anybody.
That's definitely true in some instances, yeah. Although I've also had instances where the tenant knew they needed to be as cooperative as possible to pay because there was somebody else who wanted their spot.
Oh, wow.
So it can happen either way. Yeah.
So was that a retail spot, or, because we're talking about commercial real estate today, so.
Yeah, it was actually a restaurant location.
It was a restaurant location. That's very interesting. Well, and actually that's encouraging. It means that some of our businesses are flourishing here in Southern Oregon.
Especially if you emphasize takeout or delivery. Yeah, you can doing well.
Mm-hmm.
You've all driven by the fast food places with lines around the block for their drive-through, and that wasn't that way before the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah, and again, you're right though, Scott. If they had that before, that type of business of takeout or pickup, they survived and did well. But if you had to start from scratch, many of them couldn't do it. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I think it was, put it out that about 20 to 25%, or even I've heard as high as 30% of businesses are not going to reopen when this thing is over, whenever. Which would be staggering and have a huge effect on everything from rents to pricing, everything.
That sounds pretty high.
Also hear? What do you think?
It's terrifying to think about, because if you compare decreases in sales numbers during the 2008 start of that recession, they are dwarfed by the stuff we're hearing now.
Oh, Yes.
Oh, bummer.
Drop in retail sales of 15 or 16% in 1 month. Some also huge drop in manufacturing in the span of 1 month. A lot of people are really hoping this is a quick dip based not on consumer demand decreases, but just strictly on the shutdown.
Well, what do you think is going to happen, Scott?
I think we're on the edge of a big correction. I mean, we were kind of due for a correction / recession of some sort based on, the traditional 10 to 12 year cycle. And everybody was waiting to figure out what was going to cause that because the economy was just running like a steam train. And as usual, it's something that nobody expects, like a housing crisis, or in this case, a worldwide disease. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of businesses who are looking to change the way they do things and their overhead and their rent and all that.
Mm-hmm. We've learned one thing about working at home, people changing the way they do it. In a lot of places, even like real estate offices, big offices, you really don't need that kind of thing anymore, do you? I think we've come to maybe accept out of this, working more at home is okay. And I think that's going to change a lot of the dynamics too. Bankers, you name it, from the real estate companies to the title companies, Alice, they're all doing that. Lenders, big spaces, big offices really are no longer going to be the thing that you need anymore.
Well, and Scott, maybe you can answer this too, is like even the government agencies, the Fish and Wildlife, the DEQ, the DMV, they're all working from home. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen when it comes time to come back and those people don't want to come back, like Pete is saying, because they figured it out?
If they can maintain productivity, I think there's a real chance it stays this way. Mark Zuckerberg, head of Facebook, founder of Facebook today, released a document outlining his company's plans to, at some point, have 50% of their workforce at home in the future. And so they've learned a lot of lessons very quickly, as a bunch of companies. Government entities, I'm less likely to think will go to the stay-at-home method.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of unions there. And taxpayers don't want to be talking to somebody on their couch at home who should
with their dog barking.
Yeah, it works for some, but not for others. I think more than anything, doesn't it?
Knowledge workers, it's a natural fit, and the market was heading that way anyways.
So in the Facebook model, where they're going to start offloading 50% of their commercial real estate occupancy and let people work at home, the benefits to that's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, I can see that all of a sudden they can save some money on their commercial real estate situation, but like you were talking about productivity, I mean, how do you know that they're really working, and what if it doesn't work? Are they going to have to bring them back?
There's some studies that say the productivity goes up
when you work at home.
When you work at home for certain types of jobs that require creativity and privacy. The higher end the job, the better I think the better that will work, because those people are self-motivated and compensated based on performance a lot. Lower end jobs that are paid hourly, I don't know how you can maintain productivity unless you have a really good, like, cloud internet-based program that allows you to track people's activities and progress on things, that's coming. That has to be on the horizon.
Alice, I think you're going to see schools maybe come back like half days with half students, and large, stores even changing that. So many people in the stores, things like that. So I think we're just starting to see this because of, but look, so let me ask you guys this. How do you think the first week of reopening went in Jackson and Josephine counties this week? What did I know restaurants were pretty slow, at least I just went into one, because everybody's kind of slow coming back. I know we got a break coming up, but what do you think? Did it work? Did people open up?
To me, it's a process. I've seen increased traffic at locations before. Personally, I've gone to 4 places just to, try to do my part to ramp things up again.
Yeah.
Two of them were packed.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Good.
Well, that's exciting. Our little businesses need it for sure.
Yes.
Well, when you say pack, in restaurants you can only do like 25% capacity. So how in the world can you make it at 25% capacity when that's legislated to you? So people with open air and patios are going to do better than those that don't have those kinds of things. So boy, it's even though you're back open, you're not open. That's kind of the thing we're finding too.
Again, it points to the possible change permanently in the way we use commercial real estate.
Absolutely.
Well, and we've got a break coming up. It was a very interesting conversation about Southern Oregon real estate today with Scott King of Merit Commercial. We're discussing commercial real estate in Southern Oregon and jobs and the pandemic. And we will be right back shortly. You can also check out any of our past episodes on YouTube, the real estate show, southernoregon.com. I'm Alice Lima. Pete Belcastro will be back shortly. So don't change that dial. We've got more great information coming from Scott King. So be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lima here with Pete Belcastro. We're both brokers at John L. Scott, Southern Oregon. And we're talking today to Scott King of Merit Commercial. A very interesting conversation about commercial real estate, local jobs, the pandemic, and what's going to be happening next with our buildings and our workforce. So, Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things we were talking about briefly during the break was medical buildings and if they are faring any better just because of the kind of workers and owners that they have.
It's been interesting to see. Dental clinics were shut down pretty quickly into the pandemic, except for emergency procedures. So most dental clinics just laid everybody off except for one dental assistant who could come in during emergencies.
Oh dear.
So you've got 2 months of people not getting cleanings. Not even fillings were considered an emergency. So those weren't being addressed. Even people who broke off teeth, unless they were in serious pain, they were just given antibiotics or pain meds and scheduled for later. So that's been a huge change, and that industry is continuing to struggle because people are actually also afraid to come in sometime.
Oh, afraid of the coronavirus?
Yeah. The doctor's offices, a lot of their volume just plummeted. I was talking to a pediatrician who normally treats a lot of childhood illness, but kids haven't been getting sick because they've been around other kids. So they're not catching colds, they're not getting so a lot of those things slowed down. Hospitals are laying people off because there wasn't enough, not enough population in the hospital beds to justify full employment. Even surgeries like cancer surgeries were considered non-emergency, so a lot of surgical practices laid people off or cut them down to half time.
Oh dear.
And then, the last couple of weeks since, I think, was it May 1 or May 11, they lifted that for dentistry and non-emergency medicine. So that's making a comeback.
Yeah, I don't know when they lifted that. Pete, do you?
Well, I think June 15th. Well, I know my dentist, they couldn't open up until June 15th. And so they started taking appointments that day forward, and they're like, 2 months behind now. So you're like really behind when you get into that thing. But
actually, the governor
opened up. Some opened up. I don't know if they all did, but even so, look what they did. Look how the medical community was literally wiped out here by not allowing the hospitals and things. Because remember, this whole thing was predicated on that the hospital, the healthcare system was going to be overrun with coronavirus patients everywhere. One size fit all approach. If that's something that we've learned, that doesn't work. Look how different we are than Portland here in terms of opening ourselves up and the cases and the kinds of things. Boy, huge difference. It's not a one size fit all that we've experienced here.
I'm glad the governor has let counties have some input on their own schedule for opening up now, to some extent, not enough, but she's opened that up so that the more rural counties south.
So one of the areas of commercial that doesn't get talked about as much as commercial, because a lot of people don't know that multi-family housing, anything bigger than a fourplex, is that right, Scott? Anything bigger than a fourplex is considered a commercial building?
Correct, and they're considered commercial loans and underwritten like commercial properties. Yeah.
Which is different. So if you wanted to buy a commercial property, you're, as a borrower, you're treated differently to a higher standard, I would presume.
Oh yeah, if you're getting a commercial loan, the bank's going to underwrite you. They're going to underwrite the property. They're going to underwrite best case and worst case scenarios coming up. So yeah, the interesting part to me for multifamily has been that there were some predictions that with you can't evict anybody and massive unemployment almost overnight, that not very many rents were going to be paid in apartments and things like that. But that's turned to not be near as bad as some of the predictions. Last one I read said in May, it was over 94% nationally of apartment tenants had paid their May rent.
Oh, that's really high. I thought we were told it was more like 80%.
During April, it was closer to 80%. Improved a lot, probably as the unemployment systems finally started to catch up.
I was going to say, you saw the effect of the stimulus money and the unemployment catching up. Yes, right there.
People got
the
their checks.
Scott, what's going to happen in June and July to that number? If that goes up or down, that's what it's going to tell, because the stimulus money only goes for so long.
Yeah, I think the extra unemployment check people are getting stops in July, end of July or something.
End of July.
Yeah, I mean, this is a time of change, and everybody's watching very closely and trying to make decisions with imperfect information, and that's a tough thing.
How do you see rents going here? You have rents per, of course, in commercial per square foot. Tell me what you think rents are going to be, say, around some of the different areas that are out there, because I think there's going to be a lot of empty spaces. I really do.
I predict in retail that we'll see rent rates drop. I predict in office space we'll probably see a smaller drop. Industrial spaces, I think those rents will just continue to rise. There's just such a shortage of industrial space available.
Well, and on the industrial space, I know we still have a lot of hemp processing going on in the valley. How big of a market is there for those kind of buildings with the hemp people?
So when we had our last recession, 08, 9, 10, people quit building industrial buildings for the most part. Just very few buildings have been put up in the Rogue Valley since then, especially on a spec basis, very few.
That's true.
So in supply and demand, when our housing market rebounded, all the plumbers and sheetrock guys and HVAC guys, they came back with a vengeance to the valley and working again. They all needed to move out of their garage into a shop. And then, of course, legalized hemp and legalized recreational cannabis. Any spaces that were left were taken by those guys. So there is very little vacancy in the industrial market. And because of that, I don't think those rents are going to go down.
And even with all the problems that the hemp growers had and all the kinds of losses and everything right, you still think that the shortage is going to be there again?
Yeah, I do. Obviously driving around the valley, you're not seeing near as much hemp planted this spring as last spring.
Oh, no.
Well, it's been a filtering out, as all new industries have. It shakes out.
It was kind of like a wild fraction here. Yeah. And I think a lot of the amateurs have gone home, and the professionals who know how to. But they seem to still be occupying all their industrial warehouse space.
So go ahead. Sorry.
I was out in the Applegate Valley showing property this last week, and I was just amazed at how many, remember how many greenhouses were out there? They were everywhere, as well as hemp fields. And boy, you drive out there just now, and so many of the greenhouses are just, all the plastic's gone. They're just shells of themselves.
Yeah. And
you see very, very little hemp. This was a hemp field last year. You drive, that was a hemp field last year. Nothing this year. It's minute, it seems like, right now compared to what it was. And what do they do with those fields? How are they going to sell? What are they going to do with those places? It still affects us no matter what.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a big price decrease in agricultural land as a result of that, because the demand is decreased a lot. And just anecdotally, I would say probably there's been less than half as much acreage planted.
Oh, yeah, I agree. At least that. You're right. Absolutely.
Well, and there's
Maybe
also a glut on the market. There's a lot of hemp in the United States now.
There's a lot of guys warehousing it here in hopes that prices go back up.
Yeah, but you can only do that for so long.
Yeah.
So speaking of warehouses, Scott, since we're talking about, excuse me, commercial real estate, and you were talking about supply and demand, and Pete and I talk about this all the time, that if we don't have a big supply of the industrial shop space or storage space for hemp or cannabis, are there any plans in Southern Oregon to have some of those kinds of commercial buildings put up anytime soon?
There are people with plans to spec buildings out. There's a lot of guys waiting who are willing to do build to suit projects. So they'll build it if a tenant comes along and tells them what they need to lease. But it's been a while since that market has been in balance. And seeing rents, rents have probably, since about 2013, rents have probably doubled on a per square foot basis in industrial in this valley.
Wow. So what could somebody expect to pay? Yeah, that's shocking.
If you wanted a couple thousand square feet in the city of Medford of warehouse space to run a small business out of, you'd be at 75 cents to $1 a square foot, depending on location and how nice it is. In 2012 and 13, you could get that all day at 35 cents a square foot.
Wow.
Big difference, isn't it? Hey, one thing happened this week that you both need to get comment from. There was a big major economic development that took place this week. You know what it was? Going to have a big effect on commercial real estate, residential real estate, our economy. You know what it was?
No.
There were so many things that happened this week. It's hard to narrow it down.
Okay.
What? Tell us.
I am so proud of Medford voters, because they approved the West Howard the center, the swimming complex and the event center there.
The Aqua Center.
That is going to have an effect on our economy, our community, just the way US Cellular Park did. I mean, it's going to be huge, and that is going to affect everything around it and going to affect the community generally overall. So that's like great news amongst all the pandemic stuff that we face here. And I'm really extremely proud of Medford residents for doing that. Good for them.
It's something that we've, as a town, as a city, have been kind of behind the 8 ball on compared to other cities of our size. So, and obviously people like to vote for things that they ultimately don't have to pay for.
Right? Yeah. I didn't realize that was paid for out of the hotel tax. And then the jail did not pass, and poor Sheriff Sickler, I don't know what he's going to do, but that's a completely different.
Well, he's going to come back with something. I'll tell you, the sheriff is going to, because he's been on our show before, he's going to come back with something much more modest than a $190 million project. He just has to. I mean, it's got to be different if he wants to get anything done with this, because
or he has to put it in the hotel in
well, let's face it, in commercial real estate's in the same way. That property tax just continues to go up 3% a year, 3% a year, 3% a year, and it affects everybody. And you notice no matter what happened to government revenues, the property taxes that people pay are not going down. They're still going up by that 3% this year, despite the economic downturn that we've had to go through.
Yeah, so, that's a good point.
It's just going to cost more no matter what.
So we have a break coming up, but before we do, speaking of taxes, because I think, Pete, you bring up a good point. Scott, if you could just quickly, because we do have a break coming, talk about taxes in commercial real estate, because it's quite a bit different than residential.
Yes. Probably, if I was just going to pick one thing that I would like people to hear, it would be that in most states, upon a sale of a commercial property, the purchase price then affects the tax rate.
Is the tax price, right?
So like in California, the purchase price becomes the new tax value.
Yeah.
And so if you've held a property for a generation and then you sell it and it's quadrupled in price, the property taxes go up drastically for the new owner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be looking into this as an investor, keep that in mind. So, so don't change that dial. We're going to be back very,
Okay,
very quickly.
quickly, but that doesn't happen in Oregon, which makes
It
it
No.
doesn't happen in Oregon. Oh,
Thank
good.
goodness.
That was good. Thanks, Scott, because we just about scared everybody. We'll see you
Thank
back here in
goodness.
just a second. Don't change that dial. Sorry. I'm glad you jumped in because I will just keep talking.
Yeah, I have to tell California buyers that all the time. And
And yes, yeah, and they asked that question. I mean,
Yeah,
they
it's a
asked that
good,
question.
yeah,
it's
the
a good
smart one goes
question.
back.
We can thank the Oregon Association of Realtors for that, because they try to get that in there every damn
Well, let's
2
get
years.
this, let's get that on the air. That was good. Say that again, Pete, but wait till we're on the air. Okay, everybody ready? This is our last segment, segment 4, 9 minutes. Are you guys ready?
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, so here we go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lima here with Pete Belcastro and Scott King of Merit Commercial Real Estate. We're having an amazing conversation about local real estate as pertains to commercial, industrial, medical, retail, big apartment buildings, jobs, businesses, and taxes. And right before the break, we were just talking to Scott about how taxes are different in the commercial world. And Scott, you had a good point to make about Oregon taxes and how it gets treated.
Yeah, unlike California and other states, your commercial property is not reassessed upon purchase. It's not reassessed based upon the new purchase price. It'll just continue to slowly ratchet up as it has in the past, which is a big news for people coming from California who expect the property taxes to quadruple upon sale. And it makes it easier here to buy real estate, for sure.
Well, it also makes it easier to predict what the taxes are going to be if you're taking on that kind of an investment.
Yeah, you can just pencil in your 2% increase a year and you'll normally be okay.
Well,
So,
I wish it was just 2%, the 3% increase a year.
That's mostly residential, actually. Commercial, that's mostly residential. In fact, it's statutorily required in residential.
Yes.
But doesn't affect commercial that way.
It doesn't do it that much? Okay.
More hodgepodge approach from what I can see.
so maybe a little more market oriented.
That or the assessor's too busy with houses to look at very many commercial properties. I don't know.
I think maybe you hit that right there. But hey, it was the Oregon Association of Realtors and their lobbying group, because the legislature every 2 years goes after that. Real estate's so easy to tax. They've tried to put that in, and thank goodness they haven't. Remember, Oregon has two tax rates, or two tax things. You got the real market value rate, and you got the assessed value rate, and that's where your taxes rate. And generally, the assessed value is going to be lower than your real market value. So check it out on your own. Go online and check your own property and see if that's true.
Yeah, check out the front counter application on the Jackson County website, and you can see that. Yep.
Well, and for such a small town, Medford has Jackson County has an amazing online resource. That Jackson County front counter is just the bomb. And I think people coming from bigger cities out in the area are impressed. And speaking of which, Scott, how many out of area people have you spoken with since the pandemic? Do you have people calling you from California and Seattle and places?
Every day.
Every day. And what are they asking for?
They're looking for stable rent-paying properties to invest their money in. Money's been abandoning California in droves for the last several years, and that money heads north a lot of the time to where we are. And Oregon is a very appealing place to invest for most Californians.
So when somebody calls you up and they want to come and look at getting some kind of investment in commercial, how do you advise them? Because if there's going to be a glut on the market of retail and maybe strip malls or something like that, I guess that would still be retail. Like, what do you advise them to do?
For me, I talk to the person and find out what they like and what they need, because everybody has a different risk tolerance. Everybody has a different ability or desire to manage or actively manage a commercial property. If somebody's retirement age and they're looking to invest in this area, what usually appeals to them is something that's really easy to own, where they're not responsible for maintenance and they have a good commercial tenant who maintains the building for them and is responsible for repairs. And then you've got typically what ends up being younger people who want to improve a property. So they're willing to take on a project that might have problems that they can identify, and then if they can fix, they're rewarded for through higher rents and higher property values. So that's different for absolutely everybody. You got the gamblers and you got the people who are extremely conservative and just try to match up the property type with their personality and their personal situation.
Well, if somebody has a long-term goal right now, would you advise they go more into like something big like the Rogue Valley Mall, or should they just start picking up, you know, where the softest markets are, more like strip malls or maybe even some of the
Right.
medical buildings?
Yeah, I have clients that I'm pointing towards medical buildings because, you know, that's an essential service. Dialysis clinic is not going to shut down. That's really needed in the community, and that'll be a safe investment. Your return on investment might be lower because it's safe. Return on investment is a measurement of risk as well as a measurement of investment value. So then you have somebody else who wants to take on a project and make a fortune. So they're going to buy a rundown apartment complex and fix it up and improve the tenant base and raise rents and do it that way. And that's a lot more work and more
Do you know,
risky. And,
we had one of those in West Medford, and they bought it an 8-plex for $150,000 like 24 months ago.
wow.
Yeah. All new windows, fixed it up, and now it's worth probably 5.
Yeah. So quadrupling your money, tripling your money by hard work and taking advantage of an opportunity.
Well, and taking the risk.
And risk. Exactly. Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you before we go is a lot of commercial tenants pay something called triple net, which is, I'd like for you to kind of describe briefly, and also because of the pandemic, how is that kind of rent going to be affected? Because it's pretty common in your world, isn't it?
Yeah. Triple net charges are very common. And essentially what that means is that the tenant pays a base rent and a certain amount that's just fixed. And then on top of that, every month they pay a portion of the property's property taxes, of the property's insurance, of common area maintenance, landscaping, parking lot maintenance, those things. It's a way for a landlord to pass on those costs that are likely to increase over time to the tenant. And typically it's the more sophisticated tenants, the big national chains that enter into those kinds of leases, rather than the mom and pop businesses who'd much rather just pay what's called a modified gross rent, which they pay one rate and that includes their portion of property taxes, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Going forward, if property taxes, I mean, if your assessment decreases as property values go down so much, and that would take a drastic decrease in value to affect assessed value, your triple net charges could go down.
Well, and if you're not making, if you're the business owner and you're not making any money and you're paying all this out, I just don't know quite how this is going to go in the next year.
It's going to be really interesting. I predict there will be some incredible opportunities this winter and fall.
Soon.
Yeah, I think as the fallout happens and we get more clarity on what's going to happen with the economy, I think that if you're a opportunistic buyer who wants a fantastic deal, this fall and winter is the start of that season.
Yeah, and you're right. There's probably going to be a lot on the market, and we're going to find out. Is it a good time to do any commercial building? That's going to be another thing that we're going to take a look at and see if that's going to happen, or is that going to stop as well? You're right, though, Scott. Thanks a lot. Boy, you really gave us a lot of insight into that, didn't you, Alice? Gosh,
yeah.
look at it.
Scott is one of my favorite brokers. He just knows his stuff.
Yep.
So, and thank you, Scott. We'd love to have you back sometime. Scott King of Merritt Commercial. I'm Alice Lima at Pete Bell Castro for John L. Scott and the Real Estate Show. Check us out on our YouTube website, realestateshowsouthernoregon.com. We've got lots and lots of good information there. And thanks to Pete Bell Castro, we now have 2 shows every weekend. This one that you're hearing now, Saturday, 10 a.m., and also tomorrow, Sunday at 6 p.m. So you get to hear us twice. Thanks for joining us. Have a beautiful week. We'll see you next Saturday and Sunday. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.